That was definitely not the pace we were expecting.
Have we got any idea where it went today, or what were the issues you were having in the car?
No, I really don't. It was looking good in practice, and Q1 was looking pretty decent also, and then it just started to fall away from us. The car is very, very tough to drive, so yeah, just fell away from us. I mean, 8/10 is just that's a mountain to climb.
Better tomorrow, thanks. How much can you change for the rest of the weekend in terms of, to have a better Grand Prix? You'll start P10 in the sprint, but for the rest of the weekend?
I'll be very surprised if we found something that will make us such a jump. But I hope I'm wrong, but unfortunately for now it just seems like it's the potential of our car. And very surprising the teams that are very strong this weekend, apart from obviously the McLaren and the Red Bull, which is expected, but you've got Nico in front that has done probably an amazing lap, but he's been consistently fast this weekend, so we just need to understand if they understood something that we didn't, but today was a very poor day.
What happens when Ferrari's two-star drivers, one a 7-time world champion and the other an icon of the team, begin to publicly express their frustration and hopelessness in the final stretch of the championship? Are we seeing the beginning of an implosion within Maranello just when they should be fighting for the title? From the free practice session, the only characteristic of the sprint format, worrying signs were already beginning to be noticed. Although Hamilton set decent times without using the soft tires, as soon as he moved into qualifying, his performance plummeted. Neither he nor Leclerc managed to find a balance that would allow them to attack the fast corners of Sector 1 with confidence or have traction in the slow Sector 3, where mechanical grip is crucial. But the most alarming fact was the difference in pace. Almost 9/10 separated the Ferraris from Verstappen's Red Bull, which in modern Formula 1 terms is an eternity. And as if it were not enough to be defeated by natural rivals, Ferrari was also surpassed by Sauber, its own customer team. Nico Hülkenberg, driving a Sauber with much less budget and technical resources, placed his car in a surprising 4th position. This image was devastating for Ferrari. This was not a tactical anomaly or a slipstream lap. It was a legitimate result, the product of a car that worked better in the conditions of the day, with a more coherent setup and an aerodynamic package that, ironically, seemed more refined than that of the SF25. This detail has generated a tsunami of discomfort within the Maranello paddock. Austin was not just another GP. It was the turning point that could mark the narrative of the second half of the season. What should have been a redemption turned into a public trial. Ferrari left that sprint classification not only with 2 poorly positioned cars, but with its image as a title contender completely damaged. And when the damage becomes public, when rivals perceive weakness, the blow is not only technical, it is psychological. Maranello is injured. And worst of all, neither its pilots nor its engineers seem to have the formula to reverse it. After the sprint qualifying of the United States GP, Hamilton was visibly affected. The cameras captured gestures that did not need translation. Long silences, furrowed eyebrows, and a body posture that spoke of helplessness. But it was his words, measured and at the same time devastating, that set off the alarms. It wasn't the pace we expected, he began, almost as if he forced himself to start with something obvious. Then came the phrase that changes everything: 8/10 is a mountain to climb. In modern Formula 1, where tenths are achieved with years of development, that expression is not just a technical criticism. It is a sentence of resignation. Hamilton did not speak from rage or anger. There were no promises, no motivational speeches. Just reality. The SF25 is very difficult to drive, inconsistent in its behavior, and most seriously, unpredictable. Hamilton noted that the car seemed to work well in practice and in SQ1, but then, it just got away from us. That pattern of losing performance in the transition of sessions is something that Ferrari has carried throughout the season. And Hamilton, with his experience, quickly identified it as a symptom of a structural problem. It's not about bad luck. This is a car whose operating window is so narrow that as soon as conditions vary even slightly in temperature, compound, wind, humidity, performance collapses. And if a pilot like Hamilton cannot predict or control that behavior, the problem is no longer on the track, but in the architecture of the SF25 itself. Another key element of his statement was the way he alluded to the collective effort. It seemed good in practice, he said, as if trying to understand what went wrong in the technical process, not just in his piloting. This search for answers is typical of a leader, but it also reveals internal frustration. Because when you can't even trust what you saw an hour ago, everything becomes volatile. It's impossible to build strategy, race pace, or even a decent lap when the car changes its personality from stint to stint. Sprint qualifying in Austin was a painful example of this disconnect. Leclerc, who in previous years had been able to squeeze the most out of the car even in adverse conditions, found himself without the tools to compete. From the single free practice on Friday, the problems were evident. A mechanical failure in the gearbox prevented him from completing a competitive run. He entered the qualifying session without having done complete simulations, without clear references of degradation, car behavior, or engine response under load. It's like asking a concert pianist to play a symphony without having tuned his instrument. Technically possible, but doomed to failure. During SQ3, Leclerc recorded a clean lap. He made no mistakes, did not exceed track limits or crash in key corners. But the result was devastating. 10th place with a time difference that did not reflect their talent, but the brutal limitations of the SF25. And when he was questioned by the media, his response was as sober as it was hopeless. "We are wasting time everywhere." There was no blame towards the team, no excuses, no references to traffic or conditions. Just a lucid acceptance that even doing everything correctly, the car just isn't up to par. That is the definition of technical impotence. The most alarming thing about these statements is what they imply at a structural level. When an elite driver like Leclerc cannot explain where the loss of time comes from, it means that the problem is not a specific adjustment or a defective part. It is at the very root of the car. Inconsistent aerodynamics, poor integration between the chassis and the power unit, or worse yet, a design that does not tolerate variations in temperature or downforce without collapsing its performance. The idea of a car that does not adapt, that does not forgive mistakes, and that does not offer consistency is a catastrophic scenario for any driver. But for someone like Leclerc, who bases his style on millimeter precision, it is a recurring nightmare. Another crucial element was his perception of having made a good lap without any reward. This disconnection between effort and result undermines confidence, both in the pilot and in the technical environment. Because if not even a perfect lap can put the car in the top 5, what room for improvement is there? Under normal conditions, a poor ranking can be attributed to personal errors, external conditions, or poor strategy. But when everything is executed correctly and the car still does not respond, the problem goes deeper. It is structural. It's systemic. And in the case of Leclerc, this situation is especially painful due to the history of frustrations accumulated in previous years. He has lost races due to strategic failures, pit errors, mechanical problems, and questionable wall decisions. But Austin represents a new level of hopelessness. This time there were no procedural errors. Just an inherently inferior car. Helplessness no longer comes from chaos, but from emptiness. And that, for a driver with championship ambitions, is a silent but devastating condemnation. Leclerc's language, despite its calm, reveals an increasingly tense emotional background. The pilot who previously talked about working together to find solutions, now begins to sound like someone who has stopped believing that those solutions exist. And when that faith begins to disappear, the problem stops being technical and becomes a matter of time. How much longer will Leclerc be willing to wait? How much more can you stand for your talent to be buried under a car that simply doesn't accompany you? The answers are not found in the data. They are in the silences, and they are increasingly difficult to ignore. To understand the magnitude of Ferrari's collapse in Austin, it is necessary to look beyond the weekend and contextualize it within the broader framework of the 2025 season. This was not an isolated stumble. It was one more piece in a pattern of inconsistency, frustration, and broken promises that is already beginning to generate real consequences, both inside and outside the team. What happened at the Circuit of the Americas was simply the visible catalyst for a problem that has been brewing since the very beginning of the championship. Another factor that aggravates this potential rupture is external pressure, especially media pressure. In an environment like that of Ferrari, leaks, rumors, and speculation do not take long to appear. There is already talk, for example, of possible movements in the technical direction for 2026, of pilots who could look for other options if they do not see immediate improvements, and of tensions in strategic decision-making. This type of rarefied weather not only wears out pilots, it also erodes the morale of engineers, strategists, and all track personnel. And when the focus shifts from performance to damage control, the decline accelerates. The real threat, therefore, is not just that Ferrari is behind in pace. It's just that their two references on the track no longer seem convinced that the situation can be reversed. Without a forceful, coordinated, and technical reaction from the wall and the factory, the Scuderia will not only lose another season. it could also lose the credibility of its own pilots. And that is something that no car, no matter how fast it may be in the future, can easily recover. Because trust, once broken, is rarely rebuilt with a simple aerodynamic upgrade. It is rebuilt with leadership, results, and time. Something that Ferrari can no longer afford to continue wasting. Formula One does not forgive teams that do not evolve. And in Austin, Ferrari wasn't just slow. It was vulnerable. He exposed his fragility to the entire world, and now he has a challenge ahead of him much greater than any individual career, to demonstrate that he still has the ability to learn, correct, and reinvent himself before his own history turns him into a dead weight impossible to lift. Leave me your opinion, what you think about all this.